And we're back for the Thousand Worlds Book Club, and we're concluding our discussion of Dying of the Light. In part 1 we did chapters 1 through 5, and in part 2 we did chapters 6 through 11. And so here we are with chapters 12 through 15 and the epilogue. So Ned Stark has come to planet Croyane to find his ex-girlfriend Ashara Dane, but she's married to Rhaegar, who's been handing out friendship pins to everyone on the planet to protect them from the Space Boltons. After being tricked by Littlefinger, Ned ends up offending some Space Boltons by accidentally locking them out of their car. The Hound wants to fight Ned in single combat, but Littlefinger convinces Ned to run off with Ashara Dane. Rhaegar and the Space Boltons are left holding their dicks, and so everyone gets angry and the story becomes the most dangerous game. After trying to hide in a really awesome mall, Ned and Ashara are captured, but then Rhaegar springs them free. They try to hide in the most depressing city of all time, but then Rhaegar decides he needs to go get Littlefinger. Ned has an existential crisis, and then he and Ashara realize that Littlefinger is a bad dude. Ned goes to find Rhaegar, but only finds Jon Connington all hungover. And so the two devise a plan to rescue Rhaegar. So chapter 12 has Garce and Dirk devise a plan. They'll try to separate the Braith hunters and pick them off individually. Dirk will be hunted, and Garce will join the Braith hunting party. So Jan's car was shot down, and he's off running in the woods, and the Braiths are near the crash site preparing for the hunt. Garce and Dirk drop off a laser and a warm jacket at the crash site, and Dirk is to run to this site. Garce then hands over Dirk as a gift to the Braiths, though Garce has to remove the glowstones from his armband to prove that he's no longer loyal to Jan. The Braiths actually tell Garce that they are their own holdfast now, the Lartanes, which has caused a problem with Chell. Chell considered himself Braith through and through, and so he dueled Lormar. Lormar won, and Chell lies dying, so Breton Braith is now seriously pissed at everyone. Anyway, Dirk is then stripped naked and set off to run. He heads in the direction of the crash site, which is a kilometer away. So once again our author seems to screw up distances. Most people can run a kilometer in about 5 minutes, but Dirk runs and runs and runs to the crash site. Later, he actually spends half a day coming back from the site, which is something that should honestly take, 15 minutes. Maybe in this universe, a kilometer isn't a kilometer. Like Theon running from Ramsay and his hounds, Dirk flees ahead of the Lartane Braiths and their dogs. Dirk eventually makes it to the crash site, but a dog is on him until a banshee comes out of nowhere and eats the dog. Dirk finds the laser and kills the two Lartane Braiths that were pursuing him. One is actually only wounded, so we have this long, very bloody mercy kill scene that reminds me of Arya and the Hound mercy killing people in A Storm of Swords. For reasons never explained, the jacket that Garce and Dirk left at the crash site has disappeared, so Dirk limps nakedly back to the campsite. So in chapter 13, Dirk gets to the campsite and finds that all the Lartane Braiths and Garce are gone. They are on their hunt for Jan. He sleeps in the air car for a while and then bandages himself up before getting on a sky scoot to search for Garce. A banshee then appears and leads the way for Dirk. He finds Garce, who has separated himself from the Lartane Braiths, and Garce lets Dirk know that a couple Lartane Braiths got injured and have turned back. Only 2 of them now pursue Jan. Garce lets Dirk know that he knows where Jan is going, a cave. Garce talks to Dirk a bit about his history with Jan, and the 2 men bond. Garce then talks about 2 things of note with Dirk. The first is an odd insult compliment where he tells Dirk that he's weak, but no one has ever called him strong. Earlier in the story, Gwen had said that names are important, even lies, so what I think Garce was saying is that Dirk is weak, but he isn't so weak that someone felt the need to lie to him and call him strong. So he's not that weak. Next, Garce tells Dirk his world philosophy. He essentially says that real mock men are not the creatures of legend, but men without code. It's their souls that shift and not their bodies. The substance of humanity is code and conviction and promises, but it's internal. There is a hope that by wearing things externally like iron, that the internal will follow suit. Dirk then teases Garce and asks what's the purpose of silver, which would be what's the purpose of the woman's role. Anyway, Garce calls Dirk friend, and they go off to find Jan. They do find Jan, but Jan then kills Garce because he wasn't wearing his glowstones. So chapter 14 begins with Jan being super sad that he had to kill Garce, thinking that Garce betrayed him. Dirk keeps it a secret that Garce was actually true, figuring that the truth would hurt Jan even more. They leave, and a bunch of tree spooks and a banshee consume Garce's body. They then head over a ridge and find the city of Crine Lamia aflame. Breton Braith is apparently now on the warpath and shot up the city in an attempt to burn it down to kill Dirk and Jan. Of course, the idea of burning a whole city down to find someone reminds me of Salt Pans and Jon Connington's Lament of Stony Sept. Gwen is there with her captive Arkin. Arkin apparently went to find Gwen and she captured him. Dirk convinces her to untie him to keep up the ruse that Garce was a betrayer. Arkin had apparently told Jan that Garce was coming for him. Dirk later finds Gwen and they have one final conversation about them. He notices that Gwen now wears an iron armband showing that Jan has elevated her to Tane. This is normally a position only for men. Dirk then gives Gwen one of Garce's glowstones to mix in with her future ones, and he tries to give his Whisper Jewel to her, but she gives it back. Gwen reveals that her Whisper Jewel doesn't even work anymore. Dirk tells her that his promise to her still stands, otherwise he's nothing more than a mockman. Gwen then says that they should go back to Lartane to face the remaining braiths. There is no law anymore, and she wants to hunt the hunters. Dirk kisses Gwen, but it's a dry, hard, crappy kiss. The gang then heads back to Lartane to find more Lartane braiths dead by the hand of Breton Braith. This actually leaves just Lorimar and his Tane and Breton as the last braiths. Jan spends his time depressed preparing for a duel, though Dirk thinks it's doubtful he'll be granted one. And so in our final chapter, 15, our protagonists sit in Lartane, awaiting a final showdown with the braiths. This chapter takes place over the course of 8 days, which is actually roughly the time of the rest of the story combined. If you remember, back when Dirk and Gwen fled to Challenge, they had a little over 2 weeks until the next ship off-world. Dirk and Gwen spend the first night in their room at Challenge, then they're chased, then they spend the second night in the subway tunnels, then they're captured and escape. They spend the third night in Crine Lamia, and then the fourth night Dirk leaves to find Jan, and then they go to the Braiths, and Dirk's hunt is the fifth night. Dirk then sleeps all day in the Cavalar car and spends the sixth night finding Garce again. Then they make it to Jan's cave and spend the seventh night there before heading back to Lartane. It all gets a bit confusing as the action is usually happening at night and everybody's sleeping during the day, but it actually all works out. George R.R. Martin has been pretty careful with the passage of time. Distances? Not so much, but time, yes. Anyway, over the course of a week, they see another holdfast come and go, completely oblivious to their adventures. Dirk also has a dream of Breton, and Gwen and Arkin get into a fight. The most important thing that happens during the week is the final confession of the Grand Manipulator, Arkin Rourke. As it turns out, Arkin once had sex with Gwen. Way back 7 years ago when Dirk sent his Whisper Jewel to Gwen, she got upset, got drunk, and went to bed with Arkin. I do wonder if in their talks, Arkin convinced Gwen not to go to Dirk. Anyway, the next day, Gwen completely forgets that she had sex with Arkin. Now, it seems highly unlikely that someone would forget something like that under normal circumstances, so I have a couple options on what really happened. The first option is pretty dark. It may be that Gwen, who is weirdly the only one drinking, took Arkin to bed, passed out drunk, and Arkin proceeded to rape her unconscious body. And Arkin, being delusional, thought that he had some sort of special evening with Gwen. Arkin did earlier drug Dirk and take advantage of him, so maybe this is his creepy MO. This option would have hints of Lysa and Littlefinger's first night together, where Littlefinger goes to bed with Lysa drunkenly thinking he's going to bed with Cat, and he still believes that he took Cat's virginity. Though with both Gwen and Littlefinger, I scratch my head at what these people did in the morning when the people they went to bed with were next to them, and I'm baffled how the truth would never come up in conversation over all of those years, but whatever. The second option about Gwen forgetting is more sci-fi related. So, Whisper Jewels are a mixture of technology and telepathy. And in the Thousand Worlds universe, sex is a way to better telepathically connect with someone. We saw this in Night Flyers when the Psi handler would have sex with her Psi protege. I'm wondering if perhaps Gwen using her Whisper Jewel and then having sex did something odd. Perhaps her memories and feelings passed to Arkin the evening of her sex, leaving Arkin more in love and Gwen forgetful. It's just an idea, but I do find it odd that Gwen says her Whisper Jewel no longer works. She thinks it's because she's changed so much as a person, but Dirk has fundamentally changed as well, and his still works. Of course, there's a lot more weirdness, telepathic and perhaps otherwise, going on in this story that is never really explained. Why did the Banshees save Dirk, then lead him to Garce, and then consume Garce? Why does Dirk hear Banshee wails later, but there are no Banshees? Why is Dirk having dreams of death, and why does he keep seeing the Bargeman? Why did Gwen's armband become cold and awaken a flurry of memories in Dirk as if it were a Whisper Jewel? And speaking of that armband incident, the most salient memory of that may be the sex with Gwen, the very thing Gwen forgets with Arkin. Anyway, after revealing this craziness to Dirk, Arkin tells Gwen that no matter what happens, he wants her to publish their work with both of their names on it. Later, a man from a different holdfast but flying a Braith car arrives and lets the gang know that Lorimar and his Tane are dead. The Braiths were killed at their camp by someone who is waiting in their car. Clearly this was Breton Braith, who is now the final Braith on the planet. Now Breton waiting in Lorimar's car is a peculiar thing to happen. The first time I read this, I was reminded of Dirk sleeping inside Garce's car after the hunt. I was actually quite shocked that Dirk spent so much time hanging at the Braith camp. Him lingering seemed rather dangerous to me. What if the Braiths returned? And then we find out that Breton was at that camp as well. But when exactly did Breton get there? At some point he burns down Crine Lamia, but was that before or after hiding in Lorimar's car and killing him? I couldn't help but think about the crazy idea that while Dirk was sleeping and bandaging himself, Breton Braith was hiding in Lorimar's car at the same time. That would be pretty intense. And one mystery we never find out the answer to is what happened to Dirk's leather jacket. Did Breton Braith perhaps find it? If not, then where the hell did it go? Did tree spooks eat it or something? Anyway, later Arkin refuses to take a gun and says that he too has a code. Jan thinks that the death of Lorimar is a time for celebration and wants a drink, so Jan goes to get Arkin, but finds Arkin has hanged himself. On the 8th day, Dirk wanders and decides that he needs a code, and he runs into Karak Redsteel, our Howland Reed character who has finally arrived. The men discuss ghosts and dead things and how Redsteel's poetry will be unreadable as the Kavalar language dies. Dirk then throws away his Whisper Jewel, thinks of Jan and Gwen, but mostly thinks of Garce. He then asks Redsteel for a favor. In our epilogue, Redsteel draws a death square for Dirk near the spaceport as Breton Braith arrives. Jan and Gwen are clearly escaping the planet while this duel occurs. In this epilogue, a lot of the loose ends are tied up, but not all of them. Breton reveals that Arkin had a tracker in a coat that he gave Dirk that led the Braiths to Challenge. This is a coat that was left at Challenge. It's not the second coat that disappears from the crash site that will forever remain a mystery. It was Arkin who sold them out to the Braiths in exchange for Gwen's safety. Gwen, as it turns out, was never in any danger. Arkin's plan all along was clearly to get Dirk and Jan, his rivals for Gwen's affection, killed. Breton also confirms that it was he who burned down Crine Lamia, trying to kill Dirk and Jan. Dirk asks Breton if he would have dueled him back in Challenge, even though Dirk was declared a Mockman. Breton reveals that he never believed in Mockman, and that he only believed in Chell, who loved him despite his face. He would have dueled Dirk any time and any place. Dirk tries to remember advice Garce gave him about dueling, then he puts on a Garce-like smile, and they begin to duel. So we should really talk about this ending. In typical George R.R. Martin form, the ending is both sad and beautiful, as well as slightly ambiguous. Oh, it's not as ambiguous as, say, Star Lady or This Tower of Ashes, but it's similar to Men of Greywater Station or Bitter Blooms, where we are pretty sure our protagonist is going to die, but you never know. In fact, looking back at all of George R.R. Martin's stories, the only one that really has a firm, clear ending is the hero. Other than that, we are always left wondering and wanting more. Also in typical George R.R. Martin form, the ending is anticlimactic. And in this case, incredibly so. Most of the Braiths that the crew fears are killed off-screen by Breton, and the last showdown occurs after the story is over. It is, of course, highly probable that Dirk will die. He is not a trained fighter like Breton Braith, and Breton is revealed to be the Bargeman, a figure of death. Dirk runs from death the whole story, whether it be his literal death or the death of his love with Gwen, but now, oddly happy, he is able to face death, confident that he is a man with a code. If Dirk were to survive the duel, say Breton spares him after only giving him a few cuts, I'm not certain what he would do with himself. I suppose he could become Breton's Tane. Now the big subject that we need to talk about is code. A huge part of the story is the question of where ethics should derive from and what makes a human being. The Braiths minus Breton seem to represent extremists who believe nominally that there is an external absolute code that must be followed to the T. Of course, all absolute code falls apart eventually. It either cannot adapt to a changing world or it's riddled with contradictions and impossible tasks. Of course, we see this in the real world. Religious texts will say contradictory things like both love and kill, or something completely impossible like do not covet, or something completely impractical like do not charge interest or do not wear blended fabrics. When it really comes down to it, no one can follow an absolute code, and so people pick and choose the codes they like. The story quite aptly displays the hypocrisy of the Braiths, with their endless legalistic faux logic that allows them to rationalize the results they wanted to begin with. The braiths are relativists posing as absolutists, and I believe George R.R. Martin is pointing out that all absolutists are secretly relativists. Again, absolutism is impossible, so so-called absolutists must pick and choose, which just makes them relativists. And this does all get back to Garce's idea of the mockmen. Mockmen change their morality at will. Ironically, the braiths are the real mockmen, fully revealing their shifting ways when they form their own holdfast. Yet they do it all under the laughable guise of preserving code. Arkin Rourke is, of course, no better than the braiths for most of the story. Although he believes his pacifistic Kimdissi way is above the savage Kavalar way, it's still an external code that can be twisted and changed to horrible ends. So what's the alternative? Well, relativism is bankrupt as well, as a code that can readily change is no code at all. It's nihilism, which the story frames as incredibly depressing and wrong. Gwen oddly seems to be without code at story's end, revealing that she's as bad as a braith. Jan seems to be desperately attempting to construct a new external code, but we have no idea if it will work. But Dirk himself heads towards a third option. Rather than making choices based on an external code or having no code at all, Dirk moves towards choosing internal personal values. Essentially, Dirk seems to arrive at some sort of existential humanism. And of course, he comes to this place in an extreme way. There is no law, social norms, or religion that dominates the empty planet of Warlorn. It's just Dirk keeping his commitments. It's all very Sartre. What's interesting is we find out that Dirk and Breton are kindred spirits in this respect. We find out that despite Kavalar Code and his fellow braiths saying all sorts of weird things about the right or even obligation to kill Dirk as a mockman, Breton Braith was his own man. He would have dueled Dirk anytime, any place. Breton, too, had a personal code. In fact, Breton and Dirk seem to have the same code. They believe in keeping promises, and they believe in love, even when the other person is gone. Dirk loved Gwen, and Breton loved Chell, and with that came certain promises. Yes, Chell is dead, and Gwen will never be Dirk's Jenny again, but that doesn't matter. Dirk promised to protect Jenny, and Breton promised to honor Chell. And perhaps most of all, the two men agreed to duel. Breton and Dirk are both men of their own personal codes, and they're true to their own personal codes, which is why Dirk likes Breton, and why Breton agrees to duel Dirk. Of course, another character gets to this place as well. Garce removes his glowstones from his armbands because the external are meaningless. His love for Jan is internal. It's interesting that it's Garce and Breton who become Dirk's heroes in the end over, say, Jan or Gwen. Jan had been set up to be this perfect hero and Gwen as Dirk's true love, but it's unexpectedly Garce and Breton who Dirk most admires at story's end. Oddly, even Arkin Rourke dies keeping a code. Now, George R.R. Martin has said that his focus on existentialism was something that was part of his earlier works, but not so much in his later works. That may be true, but these themes are still there. The character I most think about with regards to existentialism is Jaime. Now, Jaime is clearly a character derived from Annalyn from In the House of the Worm, but Jaime is also very much like Dirk. He is given an external code and is unable to keep it because it contradicts. This is something he famously tells Catelyn and something I refer to as the Jaime dilemma in my videos. Yet later on, even though Cat is dead and he has absolutely no reason to honor their agreement, Jaime becomes a man who wants to honor the promise he made to her. And why is that? What's the difference between being a Kingsguard and an Oathkeeper? Well, one code is external and the other is internal. Other people gave him the Kingsguard code, which he is highly critical of, but he gave himself the code to honor Cat. Another thing I can't help but think about with regards to Ice and Fire is existentialism and the Kavalar idea of naming an essence. Aristotle believed that the essence of an object was very close to the definition of that object. The essence of a chair is a seat with legs and a back. But things start getting messy when we start talking about the essence of a person. Is the essence of a person a soul? In a repudiation of this traditionalist idea, existentialists like Sartre believe that existence precedes essence. And by that they mean that, at least for humans, they are not limited by definitions, but are free to be anything they want. A waiter is not just a waiter, he is free to be whatever he chooses to be. Jaime's page in the White Book is empty and can be filled with whatever he chooses to fill it with. A human chooses its own purpose and its own essence and perhaps its own soul. Here in Dying of the Light, though, the Kavalar attempt to give something essence by naming it. This is assigning something inauthentic to someone in hopes that they will conform to it, limiting that freedom of possibility. They are making a waiter just a waiter. I bring all of this up because I can't help but think about the Faceless Men and how they are inverted to the Kavalar. Rather than naming and trying to give essence to something, the Faceless try to unname. By having no name, they conform to no role and are ultimately free to be anything or anyone. That is, except for Arya, who resists this freedom by naming herself things from her past, like Cat, Beth, and Mercy. Anyway, that's about all for Dying of the Light, though certainly not the last story about essence and what makes a person a person. Next time we'll be discussing The Glass Flower, a story that shows how George R.R. Martin sees consciousness and likely skin changing. See you then.